In the quiet hush of early twilight, long before Salem's name would be etched in blood and superstition, there was another place. Older, quieter, and just as haunted. It was 1688 in the rigid heart of Puritan Boston, where sermons echoed louder than laughter, and shadows on the wall were not just shadows, they were warnings. The town was still young then, carved from trees and salt air, with cobbled streets that groaned like old bones. Its people whispered prayers not from peace, but from fear. Fear of sin, of strangers, of women with secrets, and children who spoke too strangely in the dark. And beneath it all, deeper than doctrine, older than any preacher's fire, there was something watching. Something no scripture could name. The Goodwin family lived on Fish Street, near the harbor where the cold Atlantic mist clung to every wooden beam of their modest home. The father, John Goodwin, was a hard-working mason, devout in his faith, stern in his parenting. His children, 4 of them, were known in the neighborhood, seen chasing each other near the docks, laughing, muddy alive. But that laughter would not last the summer. It began in a way that all great horrors begin, not with a scream, but a silence. One of the children, Martha, aged 13, fell strangely ill, not of fever or pox, but of something unseen. She would twist her limbs unnaturally, speak in tongues none could decipher, fall into fits that made her bite her own tongue until blood stained her teeth. And when the fits were done, she would not remember them. Then her siblings followed, one by one. It was not illness, the Goodwins said. It was not grief. It was something else, something darker, something foreign, something wicked. Boston in those days was ruled not only by magistrates, but by fear. Fear that the devil roamed freely, cloaked not in horns, but in flesh. Women, especially the poor or peculiar, were the usual prey of accusation. And in this case, their eyes turned toward one, an Irish washerwoman named Goody Glover. Goody Glover was Catholic, spoke only Gaelic, and carried herself with the weariness of a hunted thing. She washed clothes for the Goodwins, kept to herself, muttered in a tongue few understood. But in Boston, difference was suspicion. And when the Goodwin children began accusing her, screaming her name in fits of supposed possession, the town's mind was already made. She is a witch, said the ministers. She has made a pact with the devil. And with that, the old woman was seized. But who was she truly? Was she the villain in the tale, or the scapegoat? Was she a witch, or simply a woman who remembered too much? Let us pause here. Let us drift back even further, through layers of smoke and myth, to the heart of this tale's mystery. Because this is not merely a story of the Goodwins or of Goody Glover. This is a story about why these things happen. A story about what fear does to people. About how belief, when turned inside out, becomes a weapon. It is a story of spirits, yes, but also of secrets. And it is a story that began not in Salem, but in Boston, with a child's cry and a woman's curse. There is an old Puritan belief that the wilderness is where Satan dwells, that the forest, dark, wild, untamed, is the devil's cathedral. And so the town built walls, cleared trees, lit fires. But some things are not so easily banished. Even now, if you walk the narrow streets where the Goodwins once lived, if you listen between the footsteps and gull cries, you might still hear it. The rustling of something that was never truly buried. Not in the earth, not in the memory. It begins with a whisper, a cough in the dark, a child's voice calling your name, though no child is there. That is where we begin, not in the trial, not in the gallows, but in the moment before, when a girl first dreamed of fire and woke speaking in riddles. Let me guide you there, to the house with smoke in the chimney and tension in the air, to the courtroom thick with incense and accusation, to the jail cell where Goody Glover muttered prayers to a god her captors did not recognize, to the forest edge where old gods still stirred and watched the Puritans try to scrub the ancient world away. And at the center of it all, a girl with wide eyes and trembling hands, who did not know why she screamed. This is before Salem. This is what they chose to forget. But tonight, we remember. Tonight, we peel back the veil and descend into the truth behind the Goodwin Witchcraft Trials. Are you ready? The forest is waiting. And so is she. Her name was Martha Goodwin, 13 years old, thin as a wisp of smoke. Her hair the color of dried wheat, her eyes far too old for her face. In the daylight, she might have seemed like any other Puritan child. dutiful, silent, afraid to speak out of turn. Her hands were always busy, sewing, scrubbing, grinding grain. But at night, her dreams carried her elsewhere, into places she dared not describe. There were shadows in those dreams. Not monsters, not quite, more like watchers, figures in the periphery, whispering not in English, but in something older, rounder, more rhythmic. She told no one, for in Boston, dreams were dangerous things. They could betray you. Still, they pressed in. And one morning, while washing linens near the hearth, Martha collapsed to the floor and began to scream. John Goodwin was a man of walls, his mind built like the brick he laid daily. Solid, unbending. He did not believe in dreams. He believed in the Bible, in work, in punishment. When Martha's fits began, he first blamed the weather, then the girl's imagination, then sin. When the others, her younger sister, her two brothers, began to twitch and shriek and wail, he blamed the devil. And he was not alone. The ministers agreed. Reverend Cotton Mather, young but already feared for his firebrand sermons, was summoned. His voice was like thunder in a small church. He questioned the children. He watched them flail and speak in tongues. And when they accused the washerwoman, Glover, his eyes did not blink. "We have seen this before," he said. "In England, in New Haven, in the scriptures." He called it affliction, possession, witchcraft. But no one asked what Martha believed. No one asked if the voices that visited her might be something other than evil. Not demons, but memories. Her name was Anne. But in the town, she was just Goody, a name given to low-born women, older, widowed, and expendable. She had lived through horrors before, exiled from Ireland, her husband executed for refusing to abandon the old faith. She was Catholic in a town of Protestants, a foreigner in a land that mistrusted accents. Her hands were worn from decades of washing the sins of others out of their clothing. She lived alone, near the docks, and though she had no children of her own left, she sometimes sang lullabies in Gaelic when she worked. The songs made the children stare, eyes wide, hearts fluttering, not because of fear, but longing. Something about the words stirred something ancient in them, especially Martha. But longing, in a place like Boston, was dangerous too. To understand the people of Boston in 1688, you must understand what they feared most: chaos. They had fled the old world for the new, not to find freedom, but to escape too much freedom. To build a city of order, where God ruled and all things had their place. But the woods beyond the walls were still wild. The natives spoke of spirits that walked on two legs at night. Strange birds circled above cemeteries. Children vanished for days, returning with wild eyes and mouths full of moss. So when Martha convulsed, it was not just her body that shook. It was the illusion of control. It came quietly, not with fanfare, but in silence. One day, while recovering from a particularly violent fit, Martha sat in bed. Her hands were tied to prevent her from harming herself. Her father prayed outside the room. And there, on the edge of her vision, she saw something move. Not a shadow, not a person, a woman, standing in the corner, her face half hidden beneath a black veil. Martha blinked. She was gone. The next day, she saw her again, this time closer, whispering words in Gaelic. And though Martha didn't know the language, she understood the meaning. "You must come." Days later, while gathering firewood behind the house, Martha found something nestled in the roots of an old elm. It was a doll, not like the others. This one was made of bones and feathers, wrapped in twine and dried herbs. It smelled of cedar and blood. Its eyes were tiny black stones. She picked it up without fear, and for the first time in weeks, her hands stopped trembling. Martha began to change. Her fits came less frequently, but when they did, they were different. She no longer screamed. She spoke. In Gaelic, the words startled even Reverend Mather. He accused her of being deeper under the witch's spell. But Martha, between moments of lucidity, felt something else. Not darkness, clarity. She was beginning to see, and the more she saw, the more questions emerged. Why had Goody Glover never defended herself during the interrogation? Why did no one else see the veiled woman in the shadows? Why did the doll seem warm in her hand? Martha had grown up believing she was powerless. Girls were taught to obey, to be silent, to be small. But something in her was waking up. Not rebellion exactly, remembrance. She began to trace old symbols in the dirt outside her home. Spirals, eyes, circles within circles. Her siblings followed her, half mindless, repeating the shapes with their own fingers. When questioned, she said she didn't know what they meant. But deep inside, she did. They were not signs of evil. They were keys. Goody Glover, meanwhile, remained in her cell. She was given no translator, no advocate. When asked to repent, she simply said, in thick accented English, "I do not understand your God. I speak to mine." It was enough. The trial was short. The evidence was nonsense, strange behavior, spectral sightings, the children's testimony. Still, Cotton Mather recorded every detail. His pen scratched out the birth of a narrative that would soon spread to Salem, the narrative of girls, devils, and witches. But Martha, watching from the crowd, felt something else: grief, guilt, and a dawning understanding that she had been used. That night, Martha took the doll and snuck out of her home. The moon was thin, the streets quiet. Her bare feet padded silently over cold earth. She walked past the town square, past the stocks, past the jail. She stood before the forest's edge and stared into the trees. And then, with a breath, she stepped inside. Because the voice had returned, one last time, and whispered, "The truth is not in the church. It is in the roots, the rocks, the ash. Come see." They said the forest was cursed, not in the way legend said it, not with monsters or glowing eyes, but with something worse: silence. A silence so deep it swallowed memory, muffled prayers, made you forget who you were. But Martha stepped through the veil of branches with bare feet and unblinking eyes. Not because she was brave, but because something inside her had broken, and in its place, something ancient had begun to grow. The doll hung from her fingers. Its little black eyes stared straight ahead. It didn't speak, not with words, but she felt its pull, like a heartbeat just beneath her skin. The moment she crossed the tree line, the world changed. The air turned thick, greenish, almost damp with breath. The light dimmed, not from clouds, but from the canopy itself, which twisted overhead like clasped fingers hiding a secret. Each step on the mossy ground echoed as if the earth itself were listening. And perhaps it was. The forest wasn't still. No, it shifted subtly around her. Branches tilted when she passed beneath them. Roots curled and uncurled behind her feet. The path behind her seemed to disappear as soon as she stepped forward. Time unraveled. Was it morning still? Or dusk? Or centuries ago? She didn't notice it at first, a shimmer in the corner of her eye, like moonlight reflected in water. But when she turned, there it was, a mirror. Not one made by man, but by nature. An impossibly smooth panel of water, suspended in the air between two bent trees. No frame, no reflection, just a surface, until she stepped closer. Then it showed her something she did not expect. Herself, yes, but not as she was. It was her face the way Cotton Mather saw it. Pale, corrupted, filled with hysteria and sin. A witch's face. A liar's mouth. Possessed. She recoiled, but the reflection moved with her, smiling now. "This is how they've already written you," a voice whispered. "Is this who you are?" She stepped back. "No," she whispered. And the mirror cracked, not violently, but like frost blooming in delicate webs. The water dissolved into mist. She had passed the first gate, but the question lingered in her chest like smoke. Who was she now? Further in, the trees grew closer, twisted into shapes that vaguely resembled faces, some screaming, some whispering, some expressionless as stone. Martha walked without knowing why, only that the doll pulsed faintly in her hand like a compass. Birds fluttered above her, but these were no ordinary birds. Black as night, silent, with wings that glimmered like polished bone. One swooped low, brushing her hair with a feather-light touch. She shuddered, not from fear, but recognition. They weren't birds at all. They were watchers, spirits, memories, echoes of the women who had walked this forest before her. Some had been witches. Some had only been called that. All had been hunted, and all had left pieces of themselves behind. One perched on a low branch ahead of her and tilted its head. "You are not the first child," it seemed to say without speaking. She nodded. "I will not be the last." The bird blinked once and flew on. She came to a clearing. Dead center. A circle of ash marked the earth like a scar. Inside it, the ground was scorched black, yet no fire burned. No heat. No smoke. Just the memory of something violent. At the far edge of the circle stood a wooden stake, burnt, cracked, and at its base, ropes. Ropes that had once bound someone. Martha stepped into the ash without thinking. At once, the sound returned. Screaming, crackling, the smell of hair burning, skin melting, cloth twisting in agony. She fell to her knees, hands over her ears. The stake before her shimmered, and for a moment, she saw Goody Glover there. Not dead, but proud. The woman's head was lifted high, eyes locked with Martha's. Her mouth didn't scream. It sang, a Gaelic lullaby that filled the clearing with strange beauty. Martha's heart cracked open. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. You were only a child," the voice replied, not accusing, but firm. "But now, you are not." With that, the vision faded. The ash cooled, and when she stood, the ropes had turned to ivy. The forest twisted then. Paths that had seemed straight curled back on themselves. Landmarks vanished. A hollow tree she'd passed once now appeared again, though she hadn't turned. She was trapped. She turned left, then right, then circled back. No way forward. No exit. Her breath quickened. The doll in her hand grew heavy. She dropped it. For a moment, silence. Then the earth beneath the doll shivered, and a path opened ahead. Not visible, but felt. A vibration in her chest. A pull in her gut. Like instinct. She followed it. Step by step. As she walked, the forest spoke. Not with voices, but with memories. Faint, delicate, strung between trees like spider silk. Each thread she passed hummed. One whispered her own name. Another whispered, "Liar." Another, "Witch." Another, "Daughter." She nearly turned back. Nearly. But then a final thread brushed her cheek, and this one said, "Truth." She stopped. "I want to know," she said aloud. "Everything, even if it hurts." The forest grew still, and in that stillness, a door appeared, not made of wood, but of woven vines and bones. It swung open, and from the darkness beyond came a smell she knew too well: smoke, salt, ash, and something else. A lullaby. The door of vines did not creak. It breathed. Martha stepped through the arch of bone and bramble as if entering a lung, warm, wet, and alive. The forest behind her vanished, not suddenly but subtly, as if it had only ever been a memory. Ahead, darkness, but not blindness. There was a feeling in the black, a presence, something watching, waiting. Then the darkness shifted, split, opened, and before her stood 3 doors. The first was made of smooth wood, bleached white and carved with tiny, intricate flowers, lilies, roses, and marigolds. The scent of lavender and salt drifted from its cracks. Martha stepped toward it, hand trembling. When her fingers touched the handle, a voice whispered behind it, soft and childlike. "Do you remember what really happened?" The door opened. She was back in the Goodwin home. The kitchen, warm, flickering firelight. Her siblings laughing. But something was off. She saw herself, 13, quiet, tired. Her hands ached from laundry. Her eyes drifted constantly to the window, as if watching for something. And there, by the hearth, was Goody Glover, kneeling, washing. Her lips moved in rhythm, soft Gaelic words like prayers or poetry. Her younger brother, Nathaniel, had thrown a spoiled apple at her. Laughed. Goody didn't flinch, but she stared at him, long cold, unblinking. Martha had seen it then. That stare. It wasn't cruel. It was sad. A sadness too large for words. One that knew she would be blamed, no matter what she did. The vision shifted. Later that night, Martha's first fit. Her mother screaming. The other children crying. Cotton Mather arriving like a storm in black robes. Martha speaking Glover's name. Not because she believed the woman had harmed her, but because everyone already had. It was what they expected, what the Reverend wanted. She had said the name to end the chaos. And instead, she had begun it. Martha fell to her knees in the vision. The girl self stared at her, eyes hollow with fear. "Why did I say it?" she whispered. "Because you were afraid," the shadows replied. "And because no one listened when you said nothing." The door closed behind her without a sound. She stood still for a long time, the weight of memory like ice on her shoulders. Then she turned to the second door. This one was made of mirrors. Not just a single pane, but dozens, tiny shards pieced together into a jagged mosaic that caught her reflection in fragments. Her face broken, her body stretched. When she touched it, her hand bled. A single drop of blood disappeared into the frame, and the door opened. She stepped into a courtroom. Empty. except for Cotton Mather, sitting in the judge's seat, his eyes closed. In the witness box sat 100 Martha Goodwins, each one different. One wept, one screamed, one stared blankly ahead, one held the doll, one held the Bible. She moved among them, dizzy. The room flickered between realities, one where Goody Glover was hanged, and the town clapped. One where Glover was released, and the town burned. One where Martha never spoke, and her sister died. One where she confessed she had lied, and she was labeled the witch. No one version was more true than the others. They all lived in her. "You want a clean truth," a voice behind her said. "There isn't one." She turned. Goody Glover stood at the back of the room, dressed in white now, eyes no longer angry, just tired. "I never hated you," the woman said. "I'm sorry," Martha replied, her voice cracking. "I was just a child." "So was I," Glover whispered. "Once." The room shattered like glass falling in reverse. Martha stumbled back into the hall of doors. The third door was made of iron. Rusty, heavy, covered in scratches, as if something inside had tried desperately to escape. When she touched it, the metal stung her palm like fire. And yet she pulled. It opened with a screech that echoed like a scream trapped in stone. Inside, her siblings, bound, each one convulsing, eyes wide, bodies trembling in unnatural shapes, just like she remembered. And standing above them, her father, stone-faced, Bible in hand, muttering prayers through clenched teeth. Behind him, Reverend Mather watched, not with sympathy, but with satisfaction, like a man watching a sermon succeed. Martha stood frozen. The room blurred again. This time, she was inside her own body. The convulsions, the cold, the darkness. She remembered now what it felt like. Not possession, but pressure, expectation, fear so deep it made her limbs forget how to move. The room shifted again. This time, it was her on the floor, and another Martha stood above her, whispering, "You are not broken. You are breaking free." The bindings fell, not from her siblings, but from her. And she stood. The pain didn't vanish, but it became a fire she could carry, not to burn herself, but to see by. All three doors vanished. The hallway faded. And once again, the forest returned. This time, not with silence, but with wind. Strong, steady, like breath. A path lit with faint glowing fungus led her forward. The trees thinned. The smell changed, from rot and moss to herbs, smoke, honey, and bones. A house stood in the clearing. It had no walls, only hanging curtains of dried herbs, bones, mirrors, and feathers. The roof was thatched. The fire within burned green-blue. And standing at the doorway was a woman. Not Glover. Not quite. Older than time. Her eyes were black pits lit with stars. Her hair was both white and flame. She held a staff made of human spine. And when she spoke, her voice was the voice of all women who had ever been called witch. "Child of shadow," she said. "You have remembered. You have seen. Now, you must choose. Enter, not to ask, but to become." Martha stepped forward. The last trial waited inside. The trees parted like curtains, and Martha stepped into a clearing that felt wrong. It was too still, not in the way of peace, but the way breath holds just before a scream. The air pressed heavy on her shoulders. The silence here was not emptiness. It was listening, watching, anticipating. Before her stood a house that should not exist. Not in this time. Not in this world. It was a hut made entirely of bones, ribs woven like lattice, long femurs stacked like timber, skulls embedded in the eaves like mocking gargoyles. It had no windows, only narrow slits that oozed flickers of red light from within. The door hung slightly ajar, and the threshold was marked with symbols scorched into the earth, ancient, spiraling, not made for human eyes. Martha froze. Her breath hitched. Her mind wanted to turn back, to flee, but something older than fear held her here. Her hands trembled at her sides. The forest behind her felt closed now, silent and sealed. There was no going back, and the bone house beckoned. She approached slowly. Each step toward the hut made the earth groan beneath her boots. The bones seemed to shiver as she neared, as though remembering pain. When her hand touched the door, it didn't feel like wood or bone. It felt like skin. Cold, smooth, and pulsing faintly with life. "Martha," a voice hissed from within. Not a scream, not a threat, a greeting. She pushed the door open. The interior defied sense. The bone hut was small on the outside, but inside, The space stretched into a cavern lit with a strange reddish glow. Bones lined the walls, not clean or clinical, but still laced with flesh. Smoke hung in the air, but it smelled of cloves and rot, of blood and burning myrrh. In the center sat a figure, bent and ancient. She wore a robe of ash and crow feathers, stitched with the hair of countless women. Her face was a mask of folds, deep as tree bark. Her eyes glinted gold, but it was not blindness. It was knowing, ancient knowing, terrifying knowing. She was stirring a pot not with a spoon, but with a forearm bone. Martha's lips parted. Goody Glover? The woman didn't look up. No, she stirred again. Goody was merely a girl who knew the plants, knew the winds, knew what frightened the men in powdered wigs. They hanged her because they feared what would not kneel. Martha swallowed. Then who are you? Now the witch looked up. Her eyes pierced through time. I am the one you always feared was real. The crone rose from her stool, bones cracking like firewood. She circled Martha, eyes narrowing. You saw 3 doors, she murmured, and still you came. I had no choice, Martha whispered. No, the crone snapped. You had many, but you chose this. What? Martha stood silent, unsure. Why have you come, child of silence? The voice struck her, not in her ears but in her ribs, her stomach, her spine. She swayed. Martha faltered. I came to understand. To stop what's happening. The sickness. The lies. The punishment. The witch tilted her head. You came for power. No. Martha's voice rose too quickly. No, I came because, but she stopped herself. Because in truth hadn't she? Hadn't something burned in her chest when she saw the judges call her sister a devil? Hadn't she wanted, not only to save, but to shatter them? The witch saw her flinch. Then say it. Say you want power. Martha trembled. I want. The hut darkened. The bone pillars cracked. Flames licked up the floor, forming a ring around her feet. Say it. Her mouth opened, but her throat locked. So many years she'd been told not to speak unless spoken to never raise her voice, to never cry out, to never curse. But that's what this was. A curse, a rebirth, a reckoning. And finally, she screamed it. I want power. The fire roared. The stars above her swirled like ink in boiling water. The hut shattered into a storm of bones and feathers and light, and then reformed. Around her, through her, Martha was no longer standing. She was kneeling, her palms pressed to the earth. But it wasn't dirt. It was skin, the skin of the world. Warm, breathing. The witch walked to her. Then you must burn, she whispered. It was a literal flame, the kind that knew what part of you to scorch. She stood in the center of a spiral etched into the ground. The witch walked the perimeter, chanting in an old tongue that Martha somehow understood. What is burned cannot be owned. What is scarred cannot be controlled. What is remade will never obey. Then the fire rose. First her feet, then her hands, then her spine. It didn't hurt. It revealed. The fire curled through her limbs, pulling out things long buried. Her rage at the church that shamed her for being born with intuition. Her grief at her mother's silence in the face of injustice. Her guilt for her sister's possession, for not stopping it, not understanding it, not naming it for what it was, trauma. The fire devoured every lie she'd swallowed, every part of her she'd hidden to survive. She burned for hours, or minutes, or lifetimes. When the flames died, Martha was standing in the ash, skin unbroken, but unmistakably changed. Her voice came back first, but it wasn't the voice she'd known. It was not small or careful. It was full. A temple bell, a hunting horn, a mother wailing across the moors. She spoke a single word, no, and the air bent around it. The witch smiled. You are not finished. One more remains. This final rite was not for Martha alone. The witch led her to a pool of black water, a mirror that reflected not her face, but her shadow self. The version of Martha who had chosen silence again and again, who watched injustice but did not name it, who curled into obedience like a dying leaf. This Martha stared at her, eyes hollow, smile twisted. You think this changes you? The shadow whispered. You still want their approval. You still want to be loved. Martha fell to her knees. Because it was true. Even now, in the fire and fury and magic, she wanted her father's eyes to soften. She wanted the ministers to say she was good. She wanted the world to say she had value. But the witch stepped beside her and said, Then speak your new name, and be done with their permission. Martha rose. Her lips parted, and for the first time, she did not speak the name given to her in baptism, or the name whispered in sermons. She chose a name of her own, Ashwin, and when she said it, the pool shattered. So did the shadow. So did her past. Back in the forest clearing. The bone house gone. The witch gone. Only a mark on her palm, 3 dots in a triangle, and the faint echo of flames in her chest. She was no longer Martha. She was Ashwin, a name that meant born of fire in a tongue long buried. She was no longer a girl from Boston. She was a force, and when she walked back toward the village, her steps were not quiet. They were thunder. She returned to the courthouse, to the very steps where her sister had been taken, to the square where men muttered about demons, where women hung their heads low with grief and terror, and she stood there, alone, and sang, not a hymn, a curse, a blessing, a warning. Her voice shook the glass in the minister's house. It cracked the bell in the church tower, and it made every witchfinder in the county turn in fear, because they knew the fire had spoken, and she was only just beginning. There is a silence that follows the fire, not of peace, but of transformation, of breath held between worlds. And in that breath, Martha Goodwin was no longer who she had been. She had crossed the forest, faced memory, faced truth, faced pain. She had seen the witch in the mirror, and now, with firelight in her lungs and a voice reborn from bone and ash, she returned. Boston, 1688. The wind shifts. The birds scatter. The air tastes of iron. Word had spread like rot. Martha Goodwin had vanished into the woods, presumed lost, devoured, or cursed beyond recovery. Visual, a village paused in fear, people whispering behind doors, church bells ringing in hollow tones. The Puritan ministers preaching louder, more fevered, more afraid. And then she appeared, at the edge of town, barefoot, cloaked in shadow and ash. A girl not broken, but sharpened. Townswoman, whispers, the witch girl returns. Martha did not go home. She went straight to the meeting house, where the ministers held court over the souls of the town. The Reverend Cotton Mather stands tall and pale as a candle's last flame. He turns, shocked, as the doors creak open. You accused my sister of consorting with witches, but the sickness was never hers. It was yours. The sickness of fear, disguised as faith. Mather, stern, you tread dangerous ground, child. Martha, I've walked deeper than you will ever dare. There is power in the voice that has reclaimed itself, in the truth that no longer cowers in corners. And though Martha was just one girl, the room felt smaller. The men felt older. The spell of fear they cast wavered. The afflicted children, those once believed bewitched, were summoned to speak. Among them was her younger sister, Mercy. And here is the paradox of truth. Once spoken with conviction, it does not need to be shouted. It only needs to be heard. They made you believe your dreams were curses. But you're not broken, Mercy. You're awake. Mercy's lip quivers. Her eyes, once frantic and wide, soften. She nods. Mercy, quiet, they told us to pretend that it pleased God, that the dreams were evil. Mather shouting lies. Blasphemy. But the room no longer bends to his voice. Martha's fire had spread, not to burn, but to illuminate. That evening, a gathering was held, not to praise Martha, but to decide her fate. For when old powers feel threatened, they do not surrender, they lash. She bears unnatural knowledge. Her tongue is a serpent's. Mayor. And yet, the girls are cured. The seizures are gone. The dreams are calmed. Elder woman, softly, maybe she is what we feared. Or maybe she is what we needed. The vote was split, but no fire was lit. No gallows built. Martha would not be executed, but neither would she be embraced. She would be watched, judged, feared still. In time, the Goodwin name faded from the courts and sermons, but not from whispers, not from dreams. Martha moved into the edge of the village, near the forest, where the air was quiet and the world still remembered. Villagers came, in secret, to ask for medicine, for help with birth, with grief, with the things the church could not mend. And Martha helped them, not as a witch, but not as a girl either, as something in between. A bridge. Years later, a stormy night, Martha stands before her mirror once more. Older now, wiser, still haunted, but unbroken. The mirror ripples, and there, the silhouette of the bone which returns. Not to harm, to bow. Some spirits do not linger in hate. They linger in memory, in legacy, in the fire passed from one woman's voice to another's. Martha touches the mirror. I am not your enemy. I am your echo. And what of Salem? What of the great fire that came 4 years later? Some say it was born from fear, others from hysteria. But there were those who whispered, in secret, that Salem was no accident. That Martha Goodwin's truth, though buried, had moved something, had unveiled something, had unleashed something. Not evil, but reckoning. And Salem could not unsee what had been seen. Martha walks alone into the woods again, not in fear, not in exile, but as keeper of fire, of memory, of the voice that would not die. This is not the end of Martha Goodwin. Not while women dream, not while forests remember, not while fear calls itself faith, and someone dares to answer back, not with screams, but with story. The fire had long since gone out. The forest, once cloaked in secrets and mist, now stood silent, sun-dappled, no longer a passage of fear, but a path walked by one who returned with eyes lit by something more ancient than fire. Martha stood at the edge of the village once more, her boots pressed into the soft mud where she had been dragged months ago. The town had not changed, but she had, and they saw it. Where once their gazes dripped with suspicion and unease, now their eyes faltered. The baker's wife crossed herself. The old pastor lowered his eyes. The magistrate's lips trembled around a greeting he dared not speak aloud. Martha said nothing. She passed them like a shadow through morning fog, no longer seeking acceptance, no longer afraid. Her presence spoke louder than her voice ever could. A woman had returned, but not the one they burned. Atop the hill, beside the scorched tree where they had tried to cleanse her soul by fire, she built a cairn of bones, not from the bodies of the dead, but from the fragments of memory. A child's doll, long buried beneath the old cottage floor. A torn page from her mother's hidden grimoire. A ring that once belonged to Goody Glover. And in the center, laid bare on a flat black stone, the hairpin they had ripped from her hair as the flames danced. She did not weep. Tears had long ago turned to iron. Instead, she lit a single candle. And with it, she whispered the names of all who had been silenced. One by one, not curses, but remembering. The children came first. Curious, barefoot, wide-eyed. Those who had laughed when she screamed now came to listen when she spoke. And she did not turn them away. She told them stories, not of devils, but of the wind, not of witches, but of the world beneath the world. She taught them to touch trees and hear their hum, to place stones beneath their tongues and feel the pulse of old water, to speak kindly to moths and listen when dreams carried warnings. Some parents forbade it. Others began to listen themselves, because in Martha's presence, the land bloomed. Cattle healed, crops grew, nightmares ceased, and no one could explain why the frost no longer killed the first seeds of spring, except the old women, those who had always known but never dared speak. They began to leave offerings at Martha's gate, herbs tied with twine, bundles of salt, tiny dolls carved from elder wood, marked with protective runes. No words passed between them, but they shared a language older than fear. Years passed. The village changed. Children grew into men who had never lit a pyre. Girls became mothers who whispered tales of the unburned as bedtime stories, not with dread, but with reverence. A generation born of quiet power, not shame. And Martha? Martha grew older, but never fragile. Her hair silvered like moonlight across a dark lake, her eyes sharper than frost. They said she walked at dusk with crows at her shoulder, that wolves bowed their heads when she passed, that the wind carried her sighs as warnings to any man who raised his hand in judgment. No longer a witch, now a wise woman, a seer, the first in a long line of those who would carry the truth forward, not hidden in shadow, but etched into the land itself. Decades later, long after Martha's candle finally burned down to a wick of silence, they found her journal buried beneath the floorboards of her cottage. Its pages held no spells, only questions. What do they fear when they call us witches? Who taught them that power is poison? What would the world look like if women were allowed to remember? They built a library where her home once stood, not of books alone, but of stories passed from voice to voice, of herbs and dreams, of hands dipped in soil and hearts unashamed of longing. They called it the Circle of the Unburned. And in Salem, where shadows still stretched long across old courthouses, a girl lit a candle in her window, not in fear, but in memory. She had heard the story of Martha Goodwin, whispered not as legend, but as a bloodline. In her dreams, a forest waited. 3 doors stood silent, and a voice like bone and wind whispered, "You are not alone." The witch had not died. She had been reborn, again and again. In every woman who dared to speak. In every child who questioned the tale. In every man who wept at the price of silence. And so the world turned. But the flame, once lit, would never again be extinguished.